People like you are easy to replace." The words fell across the luxury dining room like a glass breaking in silence. Every conversation stopped. Every hand holding a crystal glass paused. Under the warm golden lights of Whitmore Grand's private dining hall in Manhattan, a billionaire CEO had just delivered a sentence he would remember for the rest of his life. Alexander Whitmore, founder and CEO of Whitmore Global, was a man who had built a technology empire worth billions by making decisions quickly and never looking back. He was known for his sharp instincts, his expensive suits, and his ability to control any room he entered. But that night, sitting at the center of a table surrounded by investors, executives, and powerful names, he made the mistake of believing he already knew the value of everyone around him. Standing beside the table was Olivia Carter, a 27-year-old black waitress wearing a pressed white shirt, a clean black apron, and a calm expression that hid years of patience. She had spent the evening moving quietly between guests, refilling glasses, arranging plates, and making sure every detail was perfect. Most people saw a uniform. They saw a server. They never stopped to wonder about the person wearing it. Alexander barely looked at her when a small misunderstanding happened near his table. A misplaced folder, a moment of confusion, and a room full of people watching created the perfect opportunity for his frustration to speak louder than his judgment. "Do you even understand what is happening here?" he asked coldly. Olivia remained still. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked at him with the same respect she had shown everyone else that night. But Alexander continued. "Some people spend their lives building something valuable. Others just stand nearby and serve those who do." The room became uncomfortable. Some guests looked away. What Alexander did not know was that Olivia Carter was not just a waitress. Before the apron, before the long shifts, before the late nights, she had been a student with dreams of working in healthcare. She had spent years studying human biology and emergency care before life forced her to choose responsibility over ambition. She carried knowledge that no one could see. She carried compassion that no one could measure. And she carried a strength that did not need to announce itself. Across the room, Alexander returned to his conversation, unaware that the woman he had dismissed would soon become the only person capable of helping the one person in the world he could never afford to lose. His mother, Eleanor Whitmore. Because sometimes the person you refuse to see is the person who changes everything. And that night, the man who believed everything had a price was about to discover something money could never buy. Long before Olivia Carter ever stepped into Whitmore Grand wearing a black apron, she had already learned what it meant to be invisible in a room full of people. Not because she lacked confidence, not because she lacked ability, but because the world often decides what someone is worth before hearing their story. Every morning, Olivia woke up in her small apartment in Queens before the city fully came alive. The streets outside were quiet, the sunlight was still soft, and for a few peaceful minutes, she had a moment that belonged only to her. She would make a cup of coffee, review her schedule, and prepare herself for another long day. On her kitchen counter sat an old notebook filled with handwritten medical notes from years earlier. It was a reminder of the dream she once chased. A dream of working in healthcare, helping people during their most difficult moments. Olivia had spent years studying biology and emergency care because she believed understanding the human body was one of the closest things to understanding humanity itself. But life had a way of changing plans. When her family needed her, she made a choice. She stepped away from school, picked up extra shifts, and became the person others could depend on. She never considered that sacrifice a weakness. To Olivia, caring for people was never a burden. It was simply who she was. At Whitmore Grand, most guests never knew any of this. They saw a waitress carrying plates. They saw someone standing quietly beside expensive tables. They saw the apron before they saw the person. Olivia had become familiar with the small moments that revealed how people truly viewed others. The guests who looked her in the eye. The guests who looked through her. The ones who remembered her name. The ones who only called her when they needed something. But she never allowed those moments to define her. Her mother used to tell her, "Your value does not change because someone fails to recognize it." Olivia carried those words everywhere. Meanwhile, across Manhattan, Alexander Whitmore lived in a completely different world. His mornings began on the top floor of a glass building overlooking the city. His calendar was filled with meetings, investments, and decisions worth millions of dollars. Every person around him measured success through numbers: revenue, growth, market share, influence. Alexander had spent 20 years proving he could win. He had built Whitmore Global from a small startup into a worldwide technology company valued at billions. Investors admired him. Competitors respected him. Employees followed his instructions without question. But success had created a distance between Alexander and the people around him. He had become someone who noticed results more than effort, outcomes more than intentions. His assistant often reminded him that his mother, Eleanor, was the one person who still challenged him. At 72 years old, Eleanor Whitmore was graceful, intelligent, and impossible to impress with money alone. She believed character mattered more than reputation. She saw things in people that Alexander often missed. That evening at Whitmore Grand, when Olivia quietly walked past Alexander's table after the painful exchange, she did not know that Eleanor had been watching. She noticed the waitress's calm response. She noticed the respect Olivia continued showing despite being disrespected. And she noticed something her son had forgotten. Real strength was not always the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes, it was the person who remained kind when nobody expected them to. What neither Olivia nor Alexander realized was that the night was not over yet. The biggest test was still waiting inside that elegant room. And when it arrived, every person there would finally understand the difference between having power and having humanity. The evening continued beneath the golden lights of Whitmore Grand, where every detail was designed to represent success. The polished marble floors reflected the glow from crystal chandeliers. The quiet conversations of executives blended with the sound of silverware against fine porcelain. To everyone inside that room, it looked like another perfect night among the wealthy and powerful. But behind the elegance, something unseen was beginning to unfold. Eleanor Whitmore sat at the center of the private dining area, observing everything with a calm wisdom that came from decades of experience. Unlike many people around her, she did not measure others by their clothes, their titles, or the tables they sat beside. She noticed the details others ignored. She noticed Olivia Carter. While other guests saw a waitress moving quietly through the room, Eleanor saw someone different. She saw patience. She saw discipline. She saw a person who carried herself with a quiet strength that could not be purchased. Across the table, Alexander remained focused on business discussions with his executives. Numbers, investments, and future plans filled the conversation. This was the world he understood. A world where everything had a value, everything had a strategy, and every decision had a measurable result. I was dealing with an important meeting. Eleanor looked toward the dining room where Olivia was helping another guest. Important people are not the only people who deserve respect. Alexander did not answer. For years, he had been surrounded by people who agreed with him, people who praised his success and accepted his decisions without question. But his mother had always been different. She was the one person who could see beyond the image he had created. Meanwhile, Olivia continued working through the evening. She did not know about their conversation. She did not know Eleanor had defended her. She simply continued doing what she always did. She helped people. She paid attention. She cared. A few minutes later, Olivia noticed something unusual. Eleanor seemed quieter than before. The older woman was still smiling, but Olivia recognized a small change in her expression, a subtle sign that something was wrong. Most people in the room were too distracted by their conversations to notice. But Olivia had spent years learning to pay attention to small details. It was something she had developed while studying healthcare. The human body often whispered before it ever demanded attention. Olivia approached carefully. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you feeling all right?" she asked. Eleanor looked up, slightly surprised. Most people had not noticed anything. Alexander turned toward them, confused by the concern in Olivia's voice. "Mother," he asked. The room slowly became quieter. The confident CEO who always had an answer suddenly found himself uncertain. For the first time that night, money, influence, and reputation meant nothing. All that mattered was the person sitting in front of him. and standing nearby was the woman he had decided was insignificant. The woman he never expected to matter. The woman who was about to prove that sometimes the greatest value is hidden where nobody thinks to look. For a moment, the entire private dining room seemed to forget how to breathe. The conversations faded. The sound of silverware disappeared beneath a heavy silence. Every person at the table looked toward Eleanor Whitmore, the woman who had spent decades watching the world change, but had never allowed wealth to change who she was. Alexander stood immediately, his confident expression replaced by concern. The same man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals without hesitation suddenly looked like a son who did not know what to do. "Mother, what is happening?" he asked. Eleanor tried to answer, but Olivia noticed the uncertainty in her voice. The room was filled with expensive suits, experienced executives, and people who had built careers solving complicated problems. Yet in that moment, nobody moved. Nobody knew what to look for. Except Olivia. She stepped closer, not because she wanted attention, not because she wanted to prove anything, but because someone needed help. "Mrs. Whitmore, can you take a slow breath and tell me what you are feeling?" Olivia asked calmly. Her voice was steady. Her movements were careful. The confidence in her tone was completely different from the way Alexander had spoken to her earlier that night. He watched closely. This was the same woman he had dismissed. The same woman he had barely considered worth noticing. But now, everyone in the room was listening to her. Olivia paid attention to the small details others had missed. She remembered Eleanor mentioning earlier that she had felt unusually tired. She remembered the slight change in her expression. She remembered the way her hands moved when she tried to hide her discomfort. Years of studying healthcare had taught Olivia that people often reveal more through small signs than through words. "I think we should get medical help," Olivia said. The room immediately shifted. An assistant reached for a phone. The restaurant manager called for support. Alexander stayed beside his mother, watching Olivia guide the situation with a calmness that surprised him. There was no panic in her voice, because for the first time that night, someone in that room saw her clearly. Not as a waitress, not as a person standing behind a tray, as a human being. Alexander noticed the change happening around him. The same guests who had ignored Olivia earlier were now watching her with respect. The same people who measured importance by money and status were realizing that the most valuable person in the room was someone they had overlooked. Minutes later, professional medical assistants arrived, and Eleanor was taken care of properly. The immediate danger passed, but something much bigger had already happened inside that dining room. Alexander Whitmore had spent his entire life believing that power came from control, wealth, and influence. But that night, he witnessed a different kind of power. The kind that stays calm when others panic. The kind that helps without expecting anything in return. The kind that does not need a title to matter. And as Alexander looked at Olivia standing quietly near the table, he finally understood something his billions had never taught him. The person he called insignificant was the person who had shown everyone what true value looked like. The night at Whitmore Grand continued, but the atmosphere had completely changed. The same room that had once felt like a stage for wealth and influence now felt quieter, more human. The crystal glasses were still on the tables. The luxury decorations still reflected under the golden lights. But the people inside the room were no longer looking at things the same way. They were looking at Olivia Carter. Not because she was carrying a tray, not because she was wearing a uniform, but because she had shown something that money could never purchase. Calm, compassion, and courage. Alexander Whitmore stood near his mother's side as Eleanor rested comfortably after receiving proper medical attention. He watched Olivia from across the room, trying to understand the person he had judged so quickly. A few hours earlier, he had only seen a waitress. Now he saw someone who had noticed what everyone else ignored. Someone who acted when everyone else hesitated. Someone who helped without asking what she would receive in return. For a man who had spent his entire career analyzing people through results and achievements, this realization was difficult to accept. Alexander was used to being right. He was used to making decisions and watching others follow. But tonight, his first judgment had been completely wrong. "You have a very kind daughter," Eleanor said softly. Alexander looked at his mother with confusion. "Daughter?" Eleanor smiled. "No, Olivia. I mean, she carries herself like someone who has spent her life taking care of others." Those words stayed with him, because Alexander knew his mother was right. There was something different about Olivia. It was not just what she did. It was the way she did it. She never looked around to see who was watching. She never searched for praise. She never tried to make the moment about herself. She simply saw someone who needed help and stepped forward. Later that evening, Alexander approached her near the service area. For the first time all night, the billionaire CEO did not walk toward her with authority. He walked toward her with uncertainty. "Olivia," he said quietly. She turned around. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore." He paused. The words did not come easily. Apologies were not something Alexander practiced often. In business, he was comfortable negotiating contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But admitting he had been wrong felt much harder. "Earlier tonight, I spoke to you in a way I should not have." Olivia looked at him silently. She was not angry. She was simply waiting to hear whether his words were sincere. "I judged you without knowing anything about you," Alexander continued. "And that was my mistake." For a moment, the powerful CEO who commanded boardrooms across the country stood quietly in front of a woman he had once barely acknowledged. The difference between them was no longer about money or position. It was about understanding. Olivia accepted his apology with a calm nod. She did not need revenge. She did not need to remind him of his mistake. Her actions had already spoken louder than any argument could. But Alexander was not finished learning. The following morning, curiosity led him to ask questions about Olivia's background. What he discovered surprised him more than any business report or market prediction ever had. Behind the simple apron was a story of determination. Behind the quiet smile was years of sacrifice. And behind the woman everyone overlooked was someone who had once dreamed of saving lives every single day. Alexander finally began to understand the truth Eleanor had seen from the beginning. People are not defined by the position they hold. They are defined by the value they bring when nobody is watching. The next morning, Manhattan looked different. The same streets that had carried thousands of people rushing toward their own ambitions now seemed quieter to Alexander Whitmore. For the first time in years, he was not thinking about market numbers, investor meetings, or the next major acquisition. He was thinking about one person he had almost ignored, Olivia Carter. Sitting inside his corner office high above the city, Alexander looked through the documents his assistant had gathered. He expected to find a simple story. A waitress working long hours. Someone with an ordinary background. Someone he could thank and move on from. But the truth waiting inside those pages forced him to see her differently. Olivia was not ordinary. She had once been one of the strongest students in her healthcare program. Her professors described her as focused, compassionate, and unusually observant. She had spent years learning about emergency care because she wanted to help people when they needed it most. But when her family faced difficult circumstances, she made a choice that changed her future. She stepped away from her own plans to support the people who depended on her. She did not complain. She did not tell the world what she had given up. She simply adapted and continued moving forward. Alexander read the information again and again. The woman he had judged based only on her job had a story far greater than the assumptions he had made. It was the realization that he had been looking at the world through a narrow window. He had spent decades rewarding people who created impressive results, but he had forgotten to recognize people who created meaningful impact. Meanwhile, Olivia returned to Whitmore Grand for another shift. Her life had not suddenly changed because one billionaire finally noticed her. She still arrived early. She still prepared every table carefully. She still greeted every guest with the same respect she had always shown. But something was different. Eleanor Whitmore treated her differently. The older woman made sure Olivia knew she was appreciated. She asked about her dreams. She listened to her answers. For the first time in a long time, Olivia felt like someone was seeing the person behind the uniform. Later that afternoon, Alexander visited the restaurant again. This time, he did not arrive surrounded by executives or assistants. He came alone. He walked through the same dining room where he had once spoken without thinking. The same room where he had allowed pride to become louder than kindness. When Olivia approached his table, Alexander looked up. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. Olivia listened quietly. You helped my mother when she needed someone to notice what others missed. But more importantly, you reminded me that a person's value is never determined by their position. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was a moment of understanding. Alexander had spent his life building a company that reached millions of people. Yet one evening with Olivia taught him a lesson no business school could provide. Success could create influence. Money could create opportunities. But character revealed who someone truly was. And for the first time, Alexander Whitmore was not trying to win a conversation. He was trying to become a better person. The following weeks brought a quiet change that almost no one noticed at first. It did not appear in headlines. It did not appear in business reports. Alexander Whitmore was still the CEO of one of the most successful technology companies in the country. He still walked into meetings where millions of dollars were discussed. He still carried the responsibility of thousands of employees. But something inside him had shifted. Before that night at Whitmore Grand, Alexander believed respect was something earned through achievement. He believed titles created importance and success created authority. But Olivia Carter had shown him something different. She had no corner office, no billion-dollar company, no group of people waiting for her approval. Yet when someone needed help, she was the person everyone looked toward. That realization stayed with him. One afternoon, Alexander invited Olivia to meet at a quiet cafe near Central Park. It was not a business meeting. There was no contract on the table, no negotiation, just two people having a conversation that would have been impossible only days earlier. I spent a lot of my life believing I understood people, Alexander said. But I think I was only seeing what was obvious. Olivia listened carefully. She had always been someone who valued actions more than words. She knew apologies mattered, but change mattered more. People are often more than what we see, she replied. Sometimes they just need someone willing to look closer. Those words stayed with Alexander, because he realized that Olivia had not only helped his mother, she had challenged the way he viewed the entire world. Shortly after their conversation, Alexander began making changes inside Whitmore Global. He started spending more time with employees outside executive meetings. He asked questions instead of assuming he already had the answers. He paid attention to the people whose work was often unnoticed. The employees who kept the company moving every day. The people who rarely appeared in presentations but made success possible. Some executives were surprised. Some wondered what had caused such a dramatic shift in the man they had known for years. Alexander never gave a complicated explanation. Meanwhile, Olivia continued working at Whitmore Grand while preparing to return to her healthcare studies. She did not chase attention after what happened. She did not want recognition for being kind. To her, helping Eleanor was simply the right thing to do. But her story began reaching people around her. Co-workers who once saw her as quiet started seeing her as inspiring. Guests who once ignored service workers began treating them with more respect. A single moment of compassion had created a ripple far beyond one restaurant. Eleanor Whitmore watched these changes with pride. She had always known her son was capable of becoming a better man. He simply needed a reminder that success was not measured only by what someone built, but by how they treated the people around them. And for Alexander, that lesson came from the person he least expected. The woman he once believed had nothing to offer had given him something far more valuable than advice. She had given him a reason to become someone worthy of the power he already had. The world around Alexander Whitmore was beginning to notice something different. The man who once entered every room expecting control was now entering those same rooms with curiosity. The change was not dramatic. It was not the kind of transformation that happened overnight. It was something quieter, something deeper, a shift that started with one simple realization. Every person had a story, even the people he had spent years looking past. Inside Whitmore Global's headquarters in Manhattan, employees began noticing the difference. Alexander started walking through the offices without a group of executives following behind him. He asked employees about their challenges. He listened to ideas from people who had never been invited into important conversations before. Some were surprised. Others were uncertain. They had known Alexander as a powerful CEO who valued perfection and results above everything else. Now they were seeing a different side of him, a side that understood leadership was not about standing above people. It was about standing with them. But the biggest change happened during a company event held several weeks later. Hundreds of employees gathered in the main conference hall, expecting the usual speech about growth, innovation, and future goals. Instead, Alexander stood on stage and spoke about something unexpected. He spoke about a lesson he learned from someone most people would never expect to teach him anything. He spoke about the importance of seeing people beyond their positions. He spoke about the employees who worked quietly every day without recognition. He spoke about respect. A company is not built only by the people whose names appear at the top, Alexander said. It is built by every person who chooses to show up and give their best. The room became silent. Many employees had never heard their CEO speak that way before. They did not know what had caused this change. They did not know about the evening at Whitmore Grand or the woman who had changed his perspective, but they could feel that something was different. Later that day, Alexander returned to the restaurant where everything began. Whitmore Grand looked the same elegant tables, the same warm lights, the same quiet atmosphere. But Alexander no longer saw it through the eyes of someone searching for status. He saw it as the place where he learned one of the most important lessons of his life. Olivia was finishing her shift when he approached her. She smiled politely, still carrying the same calm confidence she had always shown. "I heard about the changes at your company," she said. Alexander smiled. "Those changes started because someone reminded me what mattered." Olivia looked down for a moment, humble as always. She had never wanted to change someone's life. She had simply chosen to do the right thing when the opportunity appeared. That was what made her different. She did not help people because she wanted recognition. She helped because compassion was part of who she was. Alexander understood that now. He had spent years building an empire, believing success meant reaching the highest position. And while their lives remained completely different on the surface, one thing had become clear. A billionaire and a waitress had both learned the same truth. A person's worth was never determined by what the world saw first. It was revealed by what they chose to do when it mattered most. Months passed, but the lesson that began inside Whitmore Grand continued to change the lives of everyone it touched. For Olivia Carter, life moved forward one step at a time. She returned to her healthcare studies with the same determination she had carried since the beginning. The dream she once placed aside was no longer something distant. It was something she was finally allowing herself to pursue again. She still worked at the restaurant, still wore the same black apron, and still treated every person who walked through the doors with the same kindness she always had. Success had not changed her because kindness had never been a strategy for Olivia. It had always been who she was. For Alexander Whitmore, the transformation was even more visible. The billionaire CEO who once believed everything could be measured through profit and achievement had discovered a different definition of success. He continued leading one of the largest technology companies in the country, but now his leadership carried something it had been missing for years: humanity. One afternoon, Alexander visited Whitmore Grand with his mother, Eleanor. It was a simple dinner, without business partners, without executives, and without the pressure of a corporate meeting. It was just family and gratitude. When Olivia approached their table, Eleanor smiled warmly. "There she is," Eleanor said. "The person who reminded my son what truly matters." Olivia smiled, slightly embarrassed by the attention. She had never wanted to be celebrated. She had only wanted to help someone who needed it. He remembered how quickly he had judged someone he knew nothing about. And he remembered the moment everything changed. The world had taught him that wealth created importance. Olivia taught him that character created meaning. Over time, their story became something people inside Whitmore Global talked about. Not as a story about a billionaire and a waitress. Not as a story about money and status. But as a reminder that every person carries something valuable, even when others failed to see it. The employees who once felt invisible began speaking up. The company culture began changing. People started understanding that respect was not a reward given only to those with power. It was something every person deserved. Eleanor watched her son with quiet pride. She knew Alexander had not become a different person overnight. He had simply rediscovered a part of himself that had been hidden beneath years of ambition. And Olivia continued walking her own path, carrying the same quiet strength that brought her into that dining room on the night everything changed. She never needed a title to prove her worth. She never needed a fortune to show her value. Because the truth she had always known was finally understood by the man who once failed to see it. A person's worth is not found in their position, their clothing, or the opinions of others. It is found in the kindness they give, the courage they show, and the humanity they protect. Alexander had billions in his name. Olivia had something even more powerful: the ability to remind the world that compassion will always matter. And sometimes, the person everyone overlooks is the person who teaches everyone else how to truly see.